Right? Okay. And I want to introduce our speaker tonight. I'm Carolyn Rapkevian, the Executive Director of the Bar Harbor Historical Society, and we welcome all of you tonight to learn about the history of Bar Island. Before I introduce Terese, I want to acknowledge that we are in the homeland of the Wabanaki, and we extend our respect and gratitude to Wabanaki peoples and their ancestors, and we recognize their rich histories and living cultures. And I also want to let you know that if you are not a member of the Museum of the Bar Harbor Historical Society, please consider joining. Benefits include free admission to the museum, advance notice of special programs, invitations to member-only events, and other benefits as well. Tonight's speaker is Terese Miller. She's an avid fan of Acadia National Park and for the past 32 years has researched island history and the fascinating individuals who shaped the development of the island as a tourist destination. She has met lots of local families teaching at the grade schools on the island, and she is an active volunteer at the Bar Harbor Historical Society. We'll have time for questions at the end, so now I'm going to make sure everyone is muted and welcome Terese to begin.
Hi, Carolyn. So I'm going to share my screen at this point. Here we go. And there's keynote. And all right, well, welcome everybody. So maybe many of you, like me, have enjoyed a stroll, hopefully at low tide, from the shore of Bar Harbor out to Bar Island. This is a talk that I'm going to give about Bar Island, but something that used to be called Rodick Island. And particularly, I'm going to focus on the rise of the industrious Rodick family for whom the island was named after. So on any particular sunny day in the middle of summer, this is what you're going to see crossing the bar. Gosh, I remember going and having very few people, but nowadays the island just swarms with people. And oftentimes I'm struck by how folks are just going around looking at ruins and wondering, do you know what this is about? And I've done that. I have no idea at all what I'm looking at and decided that it was time to research. So here is the Rodick Homestead, and you can see a beautiful farmhouse and barn, large open fields, and down along the shore, the smokehouse and bunkhouse. So to begin with, Daniel Rodick, one of the earliest settlers of Bar Harbor, bought Bar Island from Madame de Gregoire. He then took this island and deeded it to his son, David Rodick, in 1814. And then David Rodick then deeded the island to his third son, David Rodick Jr. So the house itself that you can see off to the left was actually built originally by David Rodick back in 1814, and then the house remained in the family for David Rodick Jr.'s children to use. So here's a close-up of that property. We've got the house marked. Off in the behind the house is the barn. Off to the right of the barn, there's a little path and the stable. Behind the house, tool shed. Down along the shore are David Jr.'s son, Milton's fish sheds and smokehouse. And way in the back are the dog kennels that belong to David Rodick Jr.'s daughter, Flora, and her husband, Charles Pinio. This was a very prosperous farm. So say from 1814, when David Rodick Jr. was born and then growing up here, this was one of the homesteads that actually prospered very well. Long before tourists came, they raised sheep next door on Sheep Porcupine Island, which they owned as well. And they had a pretty comfortable but subsistence lifestyle. Where they made most of their business was with fish weirs. So here's a front view of the house and barn from the bar. The smokehouse is on the shore. It had a rail track and a car that brought fish from the shore to the end of the building, and fish were kept strung on racks while smoke from pots circulated. Flowers were grown behind the house, and you can see a back view of the house. And Flora Pinio, who was the daughter, was responsible for maintaining the flowers that were cut every afternoon, stored down in the basement of the house, and then used at the hotels the next day. Milton also ran a business storing private summer sailing yachts on shore. So he would haul sailing yachts for summer residents out, tend to them, and then launch them. So here we can see a bit of what you see today. And you might notice right in the middle of the left-hand picture of today's scene, a clump of green grass. And that's right over top of the barn and the stable. I'm not surprised with all the manure that must be in the ground. They had in that barn their horses. There was Nancy, the workhorse, Spencer, the going to town driving horse, and Racket, the children's quarter horse. At the same time, Charles Pinio, the husband of Flora, the daughter, raised thoroughbred trotting horses out on Bar Island as a hobby. Here is Milton Rodick's weirs. Look at what they do. They stretch from Bar Island all the way running parallel with the bar to the shore of Bar Harbor. A flag would be raised at the summit of that hill that many of us climb when fish were available, so that fishermen knew to stop in to pick up fish to use for bait. Milton also cut ice on Eagle Lake, Witch Hole Pond for use at the family's hotel. And they also shipped ice around the world. So for example, in 1890, Milton, along with his brother Edward, cut 5,000 tons of ice in just one winter season. Altogether, the Bar Harbor men cut 85,000 tons of ice that were shipped around the world. Now we're going to take a quick look and back up at the genealogy of this Rodick family who owned Bar Island. It started off with Daniel Rodick. He arrived 1769 to Hall's Cove. He had about 12 children, and his third son was David Rodick. He married Sally Stanwood, and Daniel deeded half of the island to David, his son, in 1814. Then David Rodick went on to have his eighth child, David Jr., and deeded him the island. This is the important ones. In orange, you're going to see David Jr.'s children. By his first marriage, he had three: Fountain, Serenus, and Flora. And they were born in the 1840s. And if you look, there are a couple of things I want to point out. Look at Fountain, never married, no children. Serenus, no children. Flora, no children. David Jr. then married a second time to Betsy Brewer. They had Milton and Edward. Milton, no children. So of that lineage of Daniel Rodick, the only one who had children was Edward, and he had three children: Eugenia, David, and Serenus. So now I want to talk a little bit about Fountain Rodick, rags to riches. I just love this guy. Look at his face. Overachiever extraordinaire, doing the typical rowing, standing up, rowing towards the front. So there was, at the time, the beginning of rusticators visiting the island, and that started with artists like Frederick Church. They arrived in 1850s. These were people who would get rooms at local farmhouses. Eventually, in 1866, the Rodick family, David Jr. and his sons, built a hotel. And at that hotel, in 1873, there was a typhoid outbreak and a scarlatina outbreak at their hotel. And they knew that this would have been the kiss of death for their burgeoning tourist industry. So this is what Fountain and Serenus constructed over Duck Brook. It's an aqueduct that brought water that originated at Eagle Lake, traveled down the Duck Brook, just where the Duck Brook Bridge is, just to the right of it. They constructed this aqueduct, and then it went in open sluices down into town to provide fresh water, and they were back in business. So the water company directors were Fountain, Serenus, Edward, Milton, and Flora Rodick, all of these brothers and one sister. And they put Bar Harbor back in business. So I want you to remember too, if you look at the dates, these guys were only in their 20s when they were undertaking these projects. So it's not like they had a ton of money to work with, and they put it up in just 3 months. The next thing they did is they took their 1866 house, the original building that the family built, and kept adding on. So here's a picture of the Rodick house. Can you imagine this family by themselves constructing the largest summer hotel in the US? It was demolished in 1906 as summer visitors started to move away from staying at hotels and instead buying up property to make their own summer estates. Here in 1881, we see the Rodick House, 600 rooms, and the fish pool lobby, nationally famous for its wealthy summer patrons, the likes of Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, the DuPonts, Pulitzers, would get rooms here and stay all summer long. It was built, owned, and operated by the Rodick family of Bar or Rodick Island. What? So they continued to occupy Bar Island and would provide things like fresh milk and cheese and flowers for the hotel. Many people in their summer cottages would also be what they called mealers, and they would take meals there at the Rodick Hotel, and they would serve 3,000 dinners a night. So, like I said, overachievers and very industrious family. Here's the Bar Harbor Fire Department. So not only did they bring water, they also developed a fire department. The original building of the Bar Harbor Fire Department was built in 1882, and it was known as the Fountain Rodick Engine Company. And if you look at who was in the fire department, we've got Fountain, he's the chief engineer, his brother Serenus, and then, of course, we've got Milton involved as well. So, and it didn't hurt that their hotel was built out of wood and the fire department was situated right behind the hotel. Now, what were the impacts of outside visitors for these local people? Here's a picture of Frederick Church, a very famous landscape artist of the Hudson River Valley School of Art. And he would come to get to know Bar Harbor very well. He came up with his mentor, Thomas Cole, and traveled there from 1850 every summer until 1860. And what he did is he actually met young Fountain Rodick when Fountain was only 10 years old. And he mentored Fountain to learn how to become an artist. And there is one of Fountain's paintings of what Bar Harbor looked like back in 1850s with just a few scattered houses and the church steeple. Fountain Rodick's obituary. So Mr. Rodick was a broadly popular man. He received a very good education in his youth. He read Greek and Latin in script as a pastime his entire life. He was unusually well-informed on historical subjects, studied deeply of geology. He was an artist of no mean ability, and in his room, some excellent oil paintings. He was an eccentric man in many ways. He preferred to live the life of a recluse, but he had many excellent points in his character, appreciated by those who knew him well. So this man, who was born and raised on Bar Island to a local family, became one of the wealthiest local citizens. He died, he suffered a stroke on the street. He was coming out of this is 1919, and he was coming out of the Rodick building. He had a stroke. He knew that it would be debilitating and a difficult thing for somebody as private as himself. And so he made the decision to go back to his home and take his own life. We'll move on to Flora Rodick Pinio. This is the sister, Mrs. Pinio, retained in rare degree charm and simplicity of character. Her outstanding characteristic was an unselfishness and a principal interest in others. She would help her father, David Rodick Jr., run that hotel. And she was married to Charles Pinio, who came down from Harrington. He became a judge, an attorney, a tax collector, a real estate developer, a banker, and a supporter of the Red Cross. Here's the staff of the Rodick House. And what they did is they basically went to Harrington, Maine, which is down east, and brought these women to Bar Harbor and housed them during the summer season. And it was, we can see Flora right there in the middle of the picture next to her brother and their dog. And during her years that she was associated with her father's hotel, she was responsible for 150 girls' well-being. Many of these girls coming again, like I said, from Eastern Maine. She always considered and looked out for their welfare. Now, there's something that if you're walking along, you go across that big wide open field, and then just keep going right at the edge of the trees, you'll see a big pile of stone. And this is where Charles Pinio, Flora's husband, kept dog kennels. And it's doubtful if many people right here in Bar Harbor realize the magnitude of the business of breeding pointer dogs, which is being carried on right under their eyes by Charles Pinio. So he had 200 registered breeding pointers that had a value of at that present time, $10,000. One of his most famous pointer dogs was one called Rip Rap. He was the national champion pointer in these years, 1897 to 1898. And we can see Rip Rap with Charles and Flora's nephew, David Owen Rodick. And if you check the pedigree of any of the famous pointer dogs today, their lineage will be traced down to Rip Rap in Bar Island. Here's a picture of Royal Young. Check out his feet. He had the most splayed feet ever. He was a devoted caretaker to the Rodick family, and as well as caretaking the house, his job would be to collect the flowers that Flora would grow, and every day take them in a cart across the bar and spread them out to the various hotels in town. Here's another of the sons of David Rodick Jr. Edward Rodick, son of David, was the postmaster, representative to the Maine legislature, and a beloved community member when he died at age 42, suddenly and unexpectedly of a heart attack. And here's his absolutely gorgeous wife, Elizabeth. And these are the three children, Eugenia, David O, and Serenus, were the children of Edward. And Eugenia, in 1938, wrote a really charming book. And if you're interested in, stop at the Jessup Library, go into the children's section, and it's called Parasols of Fern. And she did her memoirs of her time as a child living on Bar Island, and I highly recommend it. Jack Perkins got hold of her memoir and turned it into a book form. So Edward and Elizabeth's two sons, David and Serenus, themselves became prominent bankers and attorneys and were part of the Bar Harbor Banking and Trust Company, which exists till today. So here, of those three, Eugenia, David, and Serenus, only David had any children. And in fact, he only had one child. And his wife was Florence, and we see their daughter in the middle, Martha Rodick Gorman, the only descendant of the David Rodick Jr. branch of the family. So I just want to show you some things to take a look at when you're coming across the bar and you get onto Bar Island proper. You're walking up the road that led to the Homestead house. And if you just go off the road as you're nearing the top, if you're just cresting before you get to the fields, and stick your head in, there are a bunch of lilac bushes, and you'll see the old cellar hole of the homestead. And you can see the ruins from the house right there in the stacked foundation. and like I said, cross over the big wide open field and you'll come across this. These are the dog kennels where Charles Pino raised his prize pointers. Over in the corner, if you continue on the road that runs right through that field and you're headed over to the summit, like most tourists, just before you get to the road that led to Jack Perkins' house, you'll notice in the woods some cement foundations that were part of the poultry pens. Now I'm going to stop and leave the Rodicks aside for a little bit and talk about canoeing, a popular pastime considered respectable in mixed company because men could not get up to too much mischief in a tippy canoe, or so those Victorians thought. Of course, there were a lot of teenage boys whose job was to just paddle around the waters of Frenchman Bay, rescuing couples who, accidentally fell out of their canoe and washed ashore, right? So canoes were available at the native encampment down on West Street. And so this a group of people, wealthy summer people, started something called the Canoe Club. And what they did is they built a clubhouse out on Bar Island. It was located at the northwest shore of Bar Island. And all that remains is a big pile of stones along the shore. So they thanked the Rodick family for agreeing to rent to them a piece of land so that they could build their clubhouse. So we can see here, there's the clubhouse, the pier that jutted out. And notice where I marked a boulder, because that's the thing that you can look for if you're going to go to the North Shore and you want to figure out where the clubhouse. Here is a picture from that time. The clubhouse only lasted 10 years. The ladies of the Mount Desert Canoe Club would hold these parties, especially in August. And if you read the list of the members, and they had 300 members of the Canoe Club, it was the who's who of the most well-to-do of American society who belonged to this canoe club. Here's the stone chimney of the Canoe Club. And of course, since it's all crumbled and nothing else remains, you'll just see a big pile of the stones from that chimney. The Canoe Clubhouse was for dancing and tea parties, used from 1888 to 1897 for illustrious summer residents. So for an example, I'll read you. On Monday, Mrs. Potter Palmer will give a water party on the Mascot, and supper will be served at the Canoe Clubhouse on Rodick Island. Dancing is to be a feature of the evening, and the party are to return by moonlight. Boy, did those guys know how to have fun. So here's the location today. And as you can notice, there's nothing remaining. There's the boulder, just a large pile of stone along the shore. And that building, as you might have noticed also, was sitting up on pylons. So that's why you're not going to find any foundation on shore. The next thing that a lot of people don't know, and in fact, the Rodick family didn't even know, Bar Island actually doesn't belong to Bar Harbor. It's part of the town of Gouldsboro. And for 70 years, the Rodick family had been paying Bar Harbor tax money until they got it into their head that they might like to develop the island by building a bridge. And that would make it a more convenient location. And then the idea was to sell off lots of land around the perimeter of the island. And so when they went to the town of Bar Harbor and said, you should build a bridge, they went, oh, well, it's not our island, it's Gouldsboro. They took them to court, and the island to this day is actually part of Gouldsboro. So here's a Bar Island Bridge, another proposal for building a bridge. And the intention was that they would start a bridge at the foot of Bridge Street, and it would run out. And then you would get over to the island, and they would run a road around the perimeter of the island, leaving certain sections not developed, so you would have lookouts. And they were interested in doing this because, just like today, land was of a premium, and it was very hard to find any available land left for building. So in steps Edward T. Stotesbury, one of the wealthiest Americans of his time. He was an investment partner of Drexel Company from Philadelphia and a JP Morgan investor. And in order to prevent that bridge and development of the island, he stepped in and paid $100,000 to the Rodick family for the west side of Bar Island, just to prevent any, and this was in 1909, any possible development of the island. And you just think about it, what in the world did this wealthy Philadelphian investor have in mind for this? And of course, in the local newspapers, people speculated it was for an estate. And he didn't let them know any different. But in fact, it was to actually preserve the island from development. So now 1909, here's the Rodicks' house. And guess what? The land they've sold to Edward Stotesbury. So what do? Do they tear the house, the old homestead, down? Nope. They picked it up as any industrious miner would do, stuck it on logs and rolled it across the island. So remember that they still owned the eastern half of the island. And you can see where the homestead is now along the southeast shore. Next to it is the Hunt Slater Bungalow. So here's the homestead on its original site on the west side of the island. And now we can see it again. It's been moved to the southeast. When you're walking, if you go through where Jack Perkins had his house and keep going a bit further, heading in an easterly direction on the southeast side of the island, you'll come across these ruins. And these are the foundations where they put the old homestead. And in 1940s, as there was nobody left in the Rodick family interested in living out there, the heirs decided to tear the old homestead down. So that's what happened to it. Now, there were two right-of-way roads across Mabel Hunt Slater's property on the south side and north side, where tourists get lost on the island hill. So oftentimes, if you're trying to make your way to the top of the summit for that spectacular view from Bar Island, looking back over at Bar Harbor, there's a section where you're supposed to go up, and many tourists go left because there's a road. And it just seems to end in the middle of the woods. It was a right-of-way road. So take a look here. Here's where the former house site is. And then you'll see a black mark where it says the Bungalow. And then we can see another one where the Rodicks moved to the old homestead too. So there's that road that ran right across property that was part of the Bungalow. Now we'll move on to talk about that. William and Louisa Hunt family. William Hunt was a very famous artist. From Vermont. His father was the governor of Vermont, and Louisa came from a very wealthy Boston merchant. And they, like many wealthy people, brought their family up here and started summering in Bar Harbor. And here are their 4 children. Mabel Hunt Slater is the little darling sitting on mom's lap. Paul Hunt, Eleanor Hunt, and Enid. So the Hunt family came here and built something called Mizentop. It was one of the largest estates. And if you want to see the remains, go to the Blue Nose Inn. And all of that stonework at the base of the Blue Nose Inn is the foundation of Mizentop. So this is what Louisa and William built, and they started coming here. So the children actually summered here their entire childhood, continuing on well into their adulthood. So Mabel Hunt Slater in 1907 decided to buy land from the Rodicks out on Bar Island and built herself something called the Bungalow or Camp Ruffett. It was a 100-foot beautiful summer estate, 100 foot by 40 foot. And it included a little log cabin for guests. So what she did is Mrs. Slater bought from the Rodicks the middle portion of the island, 12 acres, from north to south, cutting a swath. So those right-of-way roads that you will cross over, the one that goes to Jack Perkins, or the other one that sort of disappears into the woods, those were right-of-ways for the Rodicks to be able to go across the Slater property. Here's a close-up of the detail. Very, very beautiful. Look at that little darling girl, and with her pony in a cart, and in the background, you can barely make out the log cabin. And they had this home from 1907 until 1943. And here's a map that'll just show you. Notice in the middle, Edward, it says E.B. Rodick. That's the strip of land that Mabel Hunt Slater bought from Elizabeth, the widow of Edward Rodick, and built her cottage called the Bungalow right along the South Shore. Here's Mabel Hunt Slater. She was the daughter of noted artist William Morris Hunt. She was an inventor, filing various patents. She patented a method of obtaining ice-cold water from a spigot installed in an icebox. In 1941, she designed a gauge that would show how much ice was left without having to open the icebox. She invented a sleeping bag that doubled as a garment, which was said to be used in World War I. She was 18 years old when she married one of the wealthiest cotton textile manufacturers from Rhode Island. He was 65. He only survived 9 years, but it was enough time for her to have 5 children. So the Bungalow, or Camp Prophet, it was built for Mabel Hunt Slater. It was designed by Mabel's brother, Paul, and it was used by Mabel's sister. And this is a picture of her sister, Enid. It was the summer residence for Kurt Diedrich, and any of you fans of hiking in Acadia National Park will remember that name, Kurt Diedrich Climb, or the Kurt Diedrich Path that starts near the Tarn. And it's the 12 acres lot in the middle of the island. Enid Hunt Slater funded the Kurt Diedrich Path in 1916 in memory of her nephew, Kurt Diedrich. From earliest childhood, Mrs. Slater spent all her summers in Bar Harbor, and for the past 10 years, occupied in the summer the place known as the Bungalow on Bar Island. And in the middle of this, we see a picture of Kurt Diedrich, who died in 1913 at age 26, and he was undergoing surgery, and he passed away from that. And to the right of him, we see a picture of his daughter, Elsa, and she's sitting on the memorial path, the Kurt Diedrich Path. And this summer in September, their descendants came, and I met them and showed them the path. So you can see Catherine Diedrich Hansen. She would be a great-great-granddaughter, and she's sitting on the exact same rock that Elsa's sitting on. Mabel Hunt Slater died in 1942. At that point, she was worth $25 million, and she left in her will the Bungalow property to her niece and nephew. So William Hunt Diedrich was the nephew who inherited the Bungalow on Bar Island. He was a sculptor, and he inherited it from his aunt in 1943. And this was a signal of a changing time. The next generation of those wealthy summer families no longer wanted to spend their summers in their grandmother's Victorian age resort. William Hunt Diedrich wanted to move out west and become a cowboy. So he placed an ad to sell off items from the Bungalow. And you can see July 1, 1943, furniture, plumbing, Steinway grand piano at the Bungalow on Bar Island. So remember, July 1, Elsa Diedrich was the niece who also co-inherited the Bungalow. And she gave her share of the Bungalow to her niece, Sybil Diedrich. And Sybil ended up losing the property to the town of Gouldsboro for failure to pay taxes. Sybil was living in Norway. And again, like I say, it was a signal of the changing times. The children were not coming to spend their summers in Bar Harbor like the older generation had. And lo and behold, 2 days later, after William had put an ad to sell items from the Bungalow, we see the fire chief's report, July 3, 12:30 p.m. Cause was burning rubbish. The value, $7,500, and 25 sailors, 2 soldiers, 5 firemen in 6 hours. And the Bungalow burned to the ground. And here's a 1944 aerial that shows where the bungalow location was. So this is the following year, and it's just a wide open swath. If you're crossing the bar and you look out, you might notice these poles sticking out of the ground, and that's the pier that jutted from the bungalow. And you might notice also the concrete retaining wall that was also at the base of the bungalow so that they had access to the water. So these are the foundation ruins that many people come to and go, what was that? That was the bungalow. And the property was bought by Jack Perkins. And when he sold it to the park, one of the things he stipulated is that these ruins will never be torn down by the park. So they will be there until they fall down all by themselves. You might notice the log cabin chimney in the woods. And then on the other side, there's another standing chimney, and that was from the main house of the bungalow. Now, here's something that I didn't know. In 1953, Bar Harbor had been talking with Canada about setting up a Canadian ferry terminal on Bar Island. There were two proposed sites. One, the one they eventually chose, where the current ferry terminal is, it was Edward Stotesbury's property, but the other one was Bar Island. And the plan was that you would head down, they would have a bridge that would go across, and then you would park over there on Bar Island and catch the ferry to Canada. After reviewing problems involved in both sites, which were pointed out in a report to the planning board, they decided to settle on the Stotesbury property. And that was 1953. And this is the opening day. The photo is an opening day of the ferry terminal. So then we'll fast forward. Jack and Mary Jo Perkins then were the next to occupy Bar Island. They built a cottage on the same site of the bungalow, but they built it right behind it, and they did not disturb the remaining foundation stonework. Jack Perkins was an NBC news correspondent, very famous, and he and his wife lived in California, and they got to a point in their life that they decided to retire, move to Maine, and live off the grid. And that's what they did until 2003. They had this very simple cottage built. They lived there year round. They had solar panels. They cooked with gas, and they were tied to the tide. And in 2003, because of health concerns, Jack Perkins really could not manage that lifestyle anymore. He needed more medical assistance than what he could find up here. And he and his wife reluctantly left, and they moved to Florida, and they sold to the National Park Service the property for $1 million. $1.4 million was agreed upon. And then finally, to wrap it up, what did happen to the Rodick family? Well, like I pointed out, they had most of the children of David Rodick Jr. Didn't have children. And there, in the end, were only the three children of Edward, Eugenia, David O, and Serenus. Anytime one of the family members would pass away, and they tended to pass away pretty young, they would just leave the property to the next descendant in the family. So in fact, whatever the Rodick family still owned out on Rodick Island, Bar Island, ended up in Eugenia's hands. She was the daughter of Edward Rodick, and then she passed it on to Martha. And Martha gave one portion of it to her friend Elizabeth. So, as I said, here's one of the brothers, Serenus Rodick, member of the firm of, it was a real estate firm, F&S-H Rodick. He had very large property interests. They were the Rodick family had become one of the largest owners of real estate in Bar Harbor. The amount in their case when he passed away, he had left it to his wife, and the brothers and one sister fought that will. And it turned out there he was, 1904, worth anywhere from a half to a full $1 million. To think about that local family and where they started from and what they became. So here's Martha Rodick Gorman, descendant of David Rodick Jr. family, deeded her one remaining acre of Bar Island to her friend Elizabeth Owen, who then gave the land as a donation to the National Park in 1970. And finally, so we've got the west section. Edward Stotesbury sold his west side land to John Rockefeller, who gave it to Acadia. The midsection. In 1952, town of Gouldsboro acquired it from because the Hunt Slater family had not paid taxes, and it ended up in Edgar Higgins' hands, who used it for cutting timber. It changed hands until 1981 when Jack Perkins sold it to Acadia National Park. And the east section in 1934, this was a section that was still owned by Charles Pinio. His wife Flora had already passed away. He was very elderly, had dementia. He was under guardianship, and they had a sheriff's auction, and all of that land then went to Norman Shaw, the attorney for Bar Harbor Banking and Trust. Eventually, Acadia National Park took possession by condemnation of that land. And there we have it. So now I'm ready to answer any questions.
So you can either write a question in the chat and I will read it for you, or feel free to unmute yourself and take turns. And maybe Earl will tell us if there are any questions that have come on Facebook. Terese, that was a wonderful program. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, I'm so glad. And, you know, I realized that I ran through that pretty quickly. And so just to let people know, the Bar Harbor Historical Society does have a YouTube channel. If you need to go back and check out some details, you can go on their YouTube channel and watch this or share it.
So we have a question. Did Hunt Diedrich use the bungalow as a studio?
He did not. He inherited it in 1943. His aunt died in 1942. By the time probate ended, he inherited it and came in possession in 1943, and it burned in 1943. So he never did use it.
And we have another question. Do you know what year the Canoe Club building was torn down?
1897 is when they had been renting the land from the Rodick family, and that agreement dissolved. And so 1897 is when the Canoe Club stopped functioning and they stopped maintaining it. But the building itself stood there and just eventually fell apart. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't torn down right away. It wasn't torn down in 1897 when it stopped being used. It just gradually fell apart over time.
And a couple people are asking where the Rodick Hotel was.
It was at if you go to Cottage Street, so Main and Cottage and where the Village Green is. So it was huge, and it extended from Cottage all the way down to, what is that, Firefly Lane?
Yeah.
Okay, in there. So.
And Gerald is asking, are there any Rodicks left in Bar Harbor?
Well, there's tons of Rodicks left. And what I focused on was that branch of the Rodick family that lived out on Rodick Island. But remember, there was Daniel. He had lots of other children, and he only picked one child to leave the island to. And then his son, David. And then David had a bunch of kids, but he only picked one child, David Jr., to leave the island to. So all those other Rodicks, you know, made themselves at home in Halls Cove and around Bar Harbor, and then of course scattered around the four corners of the US.
And Lisa asks, is there an area on Bar Island where hiking is prohibited?
Not that I know of.
No, I think
no, it's all Acadia National Park.
Yeah, you can't destroy any ruins. You have to be careful, but
why would you?
No, but go out and look for some of these things. It's actually a great time of year to go looking in the woods and fields.
Well, actually go in the springtime because
Okay.
hard to imagine. And Flora Rodick, as I mentioned, was famous for her flowers. Remember, she was growing flowers for the hotels. It was very important that all the rooms have fresh flowers. And you can go at springtime and find daffodils and lily of the valley and daylilies in the woods around the area where the original homestead was.
We have another question. This one about the kennels and the dogs.
Mhm.
I had read in the newspaper records that at one point Charles Pinio planned to sell all his dogs. Do you know what year he downsized the kennels?
Oh, he must have downsized in 1909 because he had all those kennels on the land that he ended up selling to Edward Stotesbury. So that I don't know that for a fact. I'd have to look some more, do some deep diving. But he certainly couldn't keep that going on once they sold the land.
Mhm.
So that's 1909.
Well, you have a lot of thank you notes, Terese.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I hope people enjoyed that. I hope the next time you go out to Bar Island, you'll take with you a little, image of this family and understand what it is you're looking at.
Well, thank you very much for the program, Terese. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. If you have friends who were not able to watch it live with us, we will be archiving it on our Facebook page, and we also plan to upload it on our new YouTube channel. So with that, I will say farewell for tonight and keep in touch with the Bar Harbor Historical Society.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.